Welcome to the Hytro Performance Podcast. My name is Dan Howells, and today we have Brian Buck with us. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Dan, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. And on behalf of Hytro, we're pleased to have you. And we're going to be delving into the world of baseball and performance today. And so it'd be really cool just to start with context and get everyone up to speed with who you are and what your experiences have been within baseball. So can you just share a little with us?
Yeah, so I'm a high performance consultant now, I guess you could call it that. I'm very fortunate to work with a group of guys. We have created essentially a team outside the team, where we've been able to work with a handful of pro athletes to really create a team around them. Uh, whether that be training, skill skill work, physiotherapy, blood work, nutritionists, et cetera. We really create kind of multiple pillars around athletes to really help them, optimize their situation, and whether that's in season or off season. So that's a lot of what I do now, and some of that is obviously with baseball players and Major League Baseball. But my baseball experience goes well back to the good old high school days of just playing it and loving the game and falling in love with it, and then being fortunate enough to go and play college, which is really, you're lucky to make it to that level, and then see how you figure it out and see how you adapt to the new demands and practice and all the demands in the weight room and all of those things. And so was fortunate enough to go and play minor league baseball with the St. Louis Cardinals, which is really one of the probably the best experiences of my adult life or young adult life, was learning on the fly. And there was so much that I took from that experience as a player that's really shaped the way that I handle athletes today, and what I say and what I don't say to athletes today, based on what my experience of really tanking it in a lot of ways, I think physically, and just not understanding stress and how to what the dose response was and how to best take care of myself. So was a player, and then went on to be working in Major League Baseball as a strength conditioning practitioner, pretty much at every level from rookie ball up to major leagues, and was a coordinator at one point as well, where I kind of oversaw our physical development of our whole minor league system. I know you know a little bit of something about that. And so did that, and then so that really shaped it from going from player to really managing it on the practitioner side, at scale. I think that was the really interesting part, was how to do that at scale, and not just one person or two people or 10 people, but really across the whole organization. So that was a really good experience from a managing, understanding and how to do that at a big number. And then from there, went on and worked for Scott Boras, the baseball agent, and really managed his clientele in Southern California. That again gave me another unique perspective of kind of the demands outside of the game, and keeping people happy and understanding there's a lot going on outside the game that impacts these players, and how can we balance it all alongside with the training, obviously, that we really controlled on that side. And then was really lucky and fortunate over the years to work on the tech side of things and understanding the data side, and getting to collaborate and consult with a handful of colleges and universities, and helping them, from a baseball but other sports standpoint, and how they can use data to best, for best practices on campus or within that organization to optimize their athletic potential. And then that has kind of led me full circle into what I'm doing now. So that's kind of a good
Nice.
answer there, I think.
A whistle stop tour, and yeah, you've had a real rich, diverse set of experiences as a strength coach, both then from, I guess, the reflection ability to look back at your playing career, and look through the lens of an athlete, and ever since then through I guess the system of baseball, all the way through to that coordinator role, which again you suggest I can empathize with and understand as well because of my time at
Yeah.
Aston, which is cool. So I'm really excited to dig into that with you today. For those then less familiar with the day-to-day demands of baseball, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that face coaches who work with baseball athletes?
Yeah, I think what I alluded to in my own minor league experience is just like managing the inputs, right? There's so many demands, and athletes are getting pulled in a lot of directions. So how do we manage all of these inputs, whether that be skill work, technical, tactical work, managing that with their training load and managing that with, other things going on in their life and all the directions they're getting pulled. And so one of the unique challenges is just how do we dose athletes to get the best response from them? And just there's no rigidity to this. If you think you have a plan, you're wrong. You need two or three of them. You need to be able to audible on the fly. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is just being extremely flexible with the day to day, knowing that they're going to present in different ways, or where you're going to be is not going to be what you thought it was going to be to get done what you need to get done. So those are some unique challenges on the day to day, I think.
Yeah. And even just delving into the constructs of managing a team of pitchers versus a team of outfield players, you've got potentially one to two strength coaches max looking after all these dynamic and probably individual schedules for each athlete. They're all
Yeah.
on these very individual schedules. And also they're part of a player development system before the major leagues, right? So each individual is trying to develop themselves to the best of their ability. And a coach to manage that it's a tough ask. It really is.
Yeah. The minor leagues is more about development than winning, and then that all changes when you get to the big leagues, right? It's all about the W, and so
Yeah.
yeah, it's very unique from that standpoint, for sure.
Well, let's look at the sort of major league side of things then at the moment. It's a very intense season from the point of view of frequency and density, probably the most density of any sport. I think 160 odd games and 180 odd days, something like that. So, how does knowing that and planning for that affect the way you prepare your athletes?
It is a long season, and it's a grind. I mean, you at the big league level, you're talking about 162 games in 180 days, roughly.
Mm.
um, there's no room for error. So you have to build the engine in the off season, in my opinion. You really have to. You got to spend time in the weight room. You got to be, really putting that work in to build the engine and to really build the qualities needed to, accelerate performance and improve performance. I think you have to understand that in season, and this is where, and I had to learn this too. I think as a young strength coach, is that in season baseball is everything, and it is not about being a lifter anymore or training like you were in the off season. So how can we dose that in a way that is a means to an end to help, prime and help them perform the athlete perform on the field. So you really need to put that work in the off season, and guys think they have a lot of time in the off season. That changes each year. Each year the guys in the league, they realize that off season, it seems shorter each year. um, and a lot of guys think they have time early on in the off season to take off and to really just allow themselves to, heal and recover, which is necessary. But your time, your window to really build the engine and build the qualities needed for that next season, you need to begin really quickly after the off season. And so I really feel that that off season time is, it's something that you need to maximize, and really put that effort in to get the development needed. And then in season, it really becomes something that fuels everything else, but it is on the back burner for sure. And then, in
Nice.
season.
Let's dig into that then. It sounds like there's a swing of you talked about stimulus and response, right? Off season is your time for stimulus and let, I guess, normal adaptive responses happen, let the body recover normally and supercompensate, right? And battle through some fatigue, whilst you've got a low volume of, say, skill work. But then season comes, winning is everything, playing every day is critical. And so there must be a swing, right? From that training becomes, sounds like it's more of a micromanagement, microdose approach. But what are some of the big focuses? What are your big rocks then in your work as a strength coach that might not be doing that much strength work?
Yeah. Well, big rocks, I mean, you're going to manage guys at scale, right? So you're not just managing one guy, you got multiple guys, and a lot of them are going to be dealing with, you know, um, acute injuries, things they're dealing with that nag them, right? So a lot of it is the nuance in the coaching, but really it's understanding that, less is more, and that we can get a lot out of just, one or two sets as long as you're hitting a certain threshold. Get
Yeah.
out of this mindset of training and needing to feel fatigued at the end of a workout. That's really the off-season grind. You
Mm.
should walk out feeling like you really put some work in. In season, sometimes you have to understand, and it took me a while to learn this, I think, as a player, But as a coach too, that there's a minimal effective dose that we can get in there and we can touch a threshold, once or twice a week to really maintain a lot of these qualities that we've already built and then get the hell out. Like this is, I think a lot of players struggle with that. I think a lot of coaches do as well. I think so. That's one big key of it is when you've hit it, get out and manage that volume that way.
Yeah, I reflect on a couple of situations in my time in baseball with major league players where you go on a very individual level and say, what can work for you to get this minimal effective dose? And for some players, they just wanted to spend the day focusing on performance. They wanted to be very acutely focused on the game. And so they would be happy to trade off 20 minutes post game, half 10, 11 at night to get two or three key lifts in for 2 to 3 sets to get that dose every 5 to 7 days. And that takes some planning, right? You as a coach, you're going to be. I can speak to your experiences, I'm sure, where you got one player who's like that, and then one player who just wants to get it done as soon as they get in, and one player that might want to avoid it altogether.
Yeah.
Um, how how important then is the recovery piece? Because again, for those that aren't in baseball, you're at ballpark at 12 and you're leaving at 11. Like, where does recovery place in that schedule for you? Is it important? Can you place an emphasis on it?
Yeah, I think that's where you got to be a little bit more aggressive with your planning and your strategy in terms of when they're going to train. And I know, look, in the minor leagues, as you know, you have more control, right? You can be a little bit more controlling of the time demands. Hey, we're going to train pregame. This is the time we're going to do it. There is no post game training for the most part, right? Depends on where you're at and kind of what the norms are. And then in the big leagues, as you know, like some guys are only going to train post game. That's just how they roll. That's what they do. But we know you bring up recovery and how do we make that an emphasis? Well, we know that, physiologically it's going to, if you're trying to go up after the game and reach a threshold and get the stimulus you're trying to get, well,
Mm.
that's going to inhibit how quickly you can then turn around and go to sleep. So, it's education. It's education for the athletes. It's understanding how can you get into more of a parasympathetic tone after the game to have better sleep, and then setting some time to train. So that's one thing. It's just managing schedules if you can do it. If the education is there and there's understanding, that's an easier conversation to have than no, you're just going to be here at this time. That doesn't really fly in the big leagues. So you got to educate, and then there's smaller things that you can be doing to really push the recovery side too. Just habits, things that they do, things they can do passively, things that they can do while they're scrolling their phone too, right? So there's things like that again you can educate the athlete to. There's just little habits that they can kind of stack with other things that they already do to really help this recovery process. And in turn, if you're getting that recovery, you can get a little bit more out of them each day.
Yeah. I guess it's looking for interval-based approaches, like where in between training can we get this recovery in? Sometimes you have pre-game practice. You can put certain players who like to recover there into a process or a protocol. Some people would prefer to do it after game. Some people may prefer to take those protocols home with them, in fact, if they're using certain technologies and so on. In
Yeah.
terms of like, again, speaking to my experiences, there was a really big push on a micro cycle for a pitcher because they knew when they were pitching, right, compared to the positional players. Um, and it wouldn't be fair for us to not mention BFR, for example, right, being at Hytro. And what were your experiences of BFR being used in a baseball environment around recovery? Because it is quite prevalent within the pitching realm.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And it's something that, looking back on my experiences, I wish I was better educated on it at the time. I think naturally, from the strength and conditioning side, you looked at BFR as something athletic trainers used in early and late stage rehab to load the athlete with lighter loads. Um, so I really viewed it as something that wasn't necessarily a tool for me at that time. Just being completely honest, I think it's something now that is more mainstream on the training side. It's more understood on the performance side how we can use this, pre-training, how we can use it for recovery, post-training. And then again, based on what we have access to as a strength coach, maybe it's something that we even use for strength work, pending our location and what we have access to, so there's science behind that too. So I think just in general, I really wish I would have been more educated on it back when I was, in organized baseball, because now it's something that I use a lot more frequently to prime the system, or to get athletes, recovering while they're scrolling their phone, and kind of as I mentioned before. So it's definitely a tool that I wish I would have had earlier.
Nice. Yeah, from seeing pictures use BFR, and you've mentioned that habit stacking. I've seen some of the best athletic trainers couple the arm care routines with BFR, which in
Yeah.
itself is a somewhat of a microdose, minimum effective dose approach to strength training that you were mentioning earlier. So it does have that benefit. Do you think that because you mentioned about being on the road and maybe not having equipment, do you think looking back, it's something that you might have instigated with on the road training for, say, positional players when you didn't
Oh,
have the equipment
100%.
needed? Right.
100%. There are certain things that are, you got to have on the road. I think a good set of bands, because you don't know what you're going to have for resistance training. You just don't know. So something like bands, something like BFR that guys can be using, those would all be something that for sure we would have on the road. I mean, we would have at home too, but the non-negotiable to go with us on the road. And I think, back to your point on the pitchers, I think starting pitchers are the most fun guys to work with in season. I think maybe you have similar experience. Like these guys know when they're going to be throwing, so we know what days we can really get after it. And we know, and we can really kind of test week to week to see how we're doing and if we're staying within kind of their normative range, with certain metrics, if the output's there. I think that was one of my most fun groups to work with. But again, you're talking about a number of things, and you talk about baseball, there are certain things that athletes do that they do every day regardless of what's going on. There are just things, and arm care routine is one of those things for pitchers that they go through. They might not even remember going through it each day
Yeah.
because it's just so much of
Habitual.
what they do. They're having conversations. But when you can amplify the effect there using something like BFR to get a better result, in the same amount of time, again, this is something I wish I would have had with me a lot earlier. And I wish I wouldn't have viewed it so much from a rehab standpoint, but really, how can we get the most bang for our buck with things that we're already doing each day? That would have been, included.
Yeah, and look, you're speaking the same reflective tone as myself. If I had the knowledge I have now around BFR, if I could go back to that time where it was being used at the Astros with real real good levels of detail with pitchers in terms of the recovery post game approaches, and those players would not give it up because of the benefit to them from a soreness and recovery point of view. But if I'd have my time again, I would look at like positional players for sure on the road, trying to get extra stimuluses in them, and actually probably saving them a need to go to high threshold outputs with heavy strength training at times. But also
Yeah.
preparation. Prep routines were big, right? Every single
Yeah.
night, you've got a window of opportunity in those preparation for games.
Yeah, well, now you're tapping into another point of how I like to use it a lot too. Is again, if we go back to what we've started talking about is in our job as practitioners is managing volume, managing stress, managing the doses that they're getting. Now that one of the biggest ways that I like to use BFR is, and one of my athletes, Trevor Story, in the big leagues now, I have him operate like this because he's such a routine guy. He does things similar every day pregame. He has the same routine. Well, the problem is, and I've openly chatted with him about this, is just that how much that volume is going to accumulate in season. Like everything has a cost, everything. So even your, basic routine, your band work and things that you're doing and med ball work that you're doing, in the weight room before you go out to the field pre-game, that all has a cost, volume wise, fatigue wise. So how can we get the body amped up and ready to perform without all of that volume? And so that is one piece of what we'll do is we'll throw on the BFR, one or two rounds of 5 minutes on, a couple minutes off, right? And that's enough to really get him in a good place where he feels warmed up without the excessive volume or the things that he feels that he needs to do. He's already there just by doing a couple rounds.
Mm.
and doing a few movements that he likes to continue to do that he feels he needs to do, but the volume is essentially cut in half or less. But he has his body still primed and in good position to go out and perform. So there's again, I didn't know that. I didn't really understand that side of it as a practitioner, 10 years ago.
Mm.
When I was, a practitioner in organized baseball, I think it's something now guys are coming around to, and that's really good to see.
Yeah, you definitely. You mentioned something there. People are coming around to. It's definitely a sh a shift that I'm observing as well. Why do you think that potentially BFR for training, preparation, recovery, whatever it is, why do you think it's not necessarily been at the forefront of the performance solutions in baseball?
Yeah, I think it's just what we're exposed to early on in our careers. And I think for me, I can speak for me, that was just an athletic training rehab tool.
Yeah.
I knew I knew what the research said at that time. It almost seemed too good to be true.
Mm.
What would happen with the body from a strength standpoint, at the loads we're talking about at minimal loads, 20 to 40% that we're improving strength. It was like, wow, this almost seems too good to be true. And then, to be honest, I was also deterred because it wasn't practical. So
Mm.
too much of the time there would have to be, someone watching the athlete as they're tethered to a machine and going through something. It didn't seem like something that could be done at scale, and it didn't seem like something that was just naturally on the performance side. So it
Yeah.
just automatically in my mind was that's an athletic training tool. And that's my own ignorance, to be honest, of why I didn't explore it further. But I think that my perspective, I probably speak for a lot of people in the industry, even today. I think it's just viewed as that, and it's not as much on the performance side or the recovery side. But I think that's changing. The more I'm talking to coaches now, they're looking for ways to enhance what they're doing. They're looking for ways to prime athletes before sessions. This is now common discussion, whereas I can honestly say 10 years ago it was not.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I love that perspective. Thanks for being so honest there. I think being based in the UK and having experiences with BFR previously, it was all around rehab and training, like actual repetition, contraction-based work. And then coming to the States and seeing it used in baseball with pitchers specifically in a recovery modality, coupled with resistance work, like for arm
Yes.
care, I was like, wow, I didn't have this awareness. I had some of the awareness of the strength and training benefits, but I was not aware of this. So much comes down to education. And I guess in the world of baseball, there's not much time to read up on these things, is there? Because every single moment is spent looking after the athletes.
Yeah. No, it's you're staying busy, and I think the best thing we can do as coaches is talk to other coaches,
Yeah.
because oftentimes you're gonna glean some information or understand that somebody's doing something better than you. They're doing it, they're more efficient than you, or they're using a tool that maybe you have not included in your program for reasons that I've already mentioned here, right? So like I think that was a big part of the game that I really enjoyed as well. In baseball, is like, hey, you play another team every 3 or 4 days. That's a good chance to go and talk with that coach. What are they doing? What are their challenges? How are they, rising above some of these things and some of these issues? So, I would encourage coaches to, one, yeah, there's a lot of education out there to find online or social media and stuff like that. But really, in my experience, the best education I ever got was just networking with other coaches, because they would tell me a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely was in that world where you just blinkered and focused on baseball and focused on the athletes in front of you.
Sure.
How much now you've stepped away a little bit and looked at developing athletes from various different sports? Yeah. What do you think baseball could glean from other sports in physical preparation? And I guess vice versa. What would be that message?
Oh wow.
I've caught you off guard with that one, I know.
No, that's a really good one. I think in general, just in my experience going across sports, like you realize that so much of the preparation is very general. I think people try and like pinhole or overfit training to be so specific, and that's such a minimal part of the actual training process, is whittling down to the very specific prep for that game. So just in general, like, hey, there's a lot of things that can be done across sports or across different athletes that works really well. And baseball, it's not that special. There's a lot of general things that work really well, and we can stick to the basics. And then, it's okay to chat with a soccer strength and conditioning coach, for example, because a lot of the preparation is going to be similar. There's going to be some differences based on energy system demand and stuff like that, right? But like, we can learn a lot just from talking with anyone in the field, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I think that we've seen a huge opportunity for sort of BFR used in soccer, and rugby in terms of those prep to perform routines, which I think were probably done in baseball far earlier. And I think they've probably learned that from baseball, these prep to perform routines, because they were seen as a mini training opportunity prior to a game in really low dose. But used for like tendon pain, used for activation, fast twitch and priming, fast twitch fiber priming as such. And then also in the recovery space, rugby, especially with bodies being run into each other, NFL
Sure.
athletes. There's so much that each sport does exceptionally well, and we should be definitely cross-pollinating that information for sure. Um, let's just move over to data and technology a little bit more specifically. There's a growing amount of data that is used to inform performance decisions. But how do you balance that in the world you work in currently? And how have you seen the evolution of data and technology over the last 10 years?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. There's a massive jump in the amount of technology out there. And I think, paralysis by analysis, like try and avoid that, right? There's a lot that we can be looking at. A lot of it we can't control. So maybe we shouldn't be taking that in all the time. And I think baseball is one of those sports where I talk to my friends now that are still in the game, at the organizational standpoint, and some of the reports that they're getting from the top that come down on all of the in-game metrics, and matching that up with a lot of their weight room metrics, CMJ, stuff like that. Is it's a mountain of things
Mm,
to try and understand and make decisions off of. So I think as coaches, the better we can simplify metrics and limit them, the better we can make decisions.
mm,
And that's something I can't say enough. I think it's cool as a strength coach to talk about data. I think a lot of us try and think that we need to know everything about data and talk about it all the time to be cool in this in this circle.
that's it.
Uh, and again, I've been that guy.
Yeah.
I've been the guy that's tried to be that guy, and I've realized that the more I can simplify and the less I look at, the better understanding I have of how the athlete is actually trending. And so I try and really simplify what I'm looking at day to day. And all exit velocity being one that gets brought up a lot with a lot of these athletes. And that's not, a lot of that is going to be based on, the skill of the swing and how they contacted the ball. And so to always try and relate it somehow to like a power metric or performance metric is interesting. So that I've just noticed that one recently being one that's always getting brought up. And you see it even on ESPN when you're watching a
Yeah.
baseball game, they'll give you exit velocity on home runs hit and
Yeah.
stuff like that. As a coach, it's just kind of, again, what do I want to pay attention to and put a lot of time into, and where can I like refine what I'm looking at?
Mm. Yeah, it's an outcome measure, isn't it? It's an outcome metric. And there are so many components, kinetics, kinematics, um, attitude of the athlete in a given moment to hitting that ball that will impact that um, exit velocity as such. Metrics are clearly important to you, and simplifying it, I can really, really resonate with that. And I can speak to having made those mistakes as well of massive dashboards and all these metrics that actually convolute the issue for me. The more I've got a friend in the industry, it's Dr. Sean McLaren, who talks very explicitly about having narrow number of metrics and deep analysis as opposed to broad and shallow. And I think that's a really good approach to have. It sounds like that's your approach. So if then you need to trust a metric or a technology or a piece of equipment like BFR, for example, what is it that you need in that metric or technology before you can trust it?
Yeah, reliability and first and foremost, I think, and then really kind of seeing it over time. This isn't something that you set these metrics and then really make a decision off of one data point. I think really understanding these trends where they typically sit, when are they outside of those norms,
Mm.
a standard deviation or two outside of, and what does that likely mean? And then again, what would be our plan if we see something out of their norm or their range? What is our plan as a group or as a staff? So all of these things must be talked about, and in theory is always how you're talking about them, and then see how they play out, and track over time. So I'm really a fan of trends as opposed to making a extreme move off of one data point. There's a lot that can fool us in data, and one thing that I've seen specifically over time is like, something like a CMJ, which I think, counter movement jump on a force plate has become more of a popular thing, across all sports, but really baseball. Whereas maybe 10 years ago, a fraction of the league was using it, and now it's everywhere, right? So something like even looking at spikes of rate of force development have been interesting to me because one thing that I've seen over time is that while we may see that as, a good thing to see, or a spike in rate of force development, how quickly they can produce force. A lot of times what I've noticed is that athlete is actually moving through an abbreviated range of motion to
Oh
avoid
yeah.
pain.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So a lot of times, if I know someone went through something in the game, I won't even bring up any of this, and I'll just see if they spike that RFD or if they move through an abbreviated range. And I can quickly tell that they're trying to avoid pain in this compensation pattern. So all of it tells a story.
Yeah.
It's not black and white, but it should help inform us, or a lot of times validate our thoughts of watching something in real time.
Yeah, nice. It's really clear listening. I hope the listeners hear it as well, is that you've got a methodical approach to interpreting this information as opposed to jumping to conclusions with a metric.
Yes.
Because again, that CMJ jump height is an outcome measure. Let's look at how they're producing those forces. Let's look at the compensations. And I think too often than not, we're in the danger of being a bit of a copy and paste culture, because of we've seen other people do it. It's on trend as such. You talked earlier about the importance of education and looking back on your career in baseball and wanting to be educated before you use things, which is really, really cool. I guess that comes into non-digital technologies as well, whether it's just something as simple as a cryo, a bike spin, compression, BFR, that there needs to be reliability in that as well for you to trust it to use with your athletes. Would that be correct? Because you must get companies coming at you for products all the time.
Yeah. So first off, practicality. Does it fit into what we already do? Like I'm open to changing a lot of my operations, and in no way am I stuck in what I'm doing. But if it doesn't fit in very easily with our current schedule and this how this athlete typically operates, it's just probably not going to fly for me, specifically. So I think something like BFR, is something that I like. One, I use on myself first. I always do that. I like to see how I feel. What is my perspective of this, of someone who didn't really know it? And then what does it feel like to use it? What does it feel like to perform after using it? How do I feel afterwards? All of these things. So I'll never tell someone to do something that I haven't done previously or that I don't do on a regular basis. I just like to be always kind of knowing what they're feeling and what they're going through. I think that's helpful. But the practicality piece is huge, obviously. And then what is the feedback that I'm getting? Even if it doesn't, technically work, I guess, quote unquote, does that make them feel better? Do they believe from a placebo standpoint that they feel better? To me, that's a win, right? It's all about we're optimizing this athlete's experience. We're trying to get more buy-in with their routines and their habits, and what is it that works. And so so I just alluded to in our previous, talk there on counter movement jump and abbreviated range of motion, some things that we've seen by including like BFR pre-training is something that's going to enhance that range of motion because there is less pain, right? So something like that. So now if I have a problem, what is my solution to that? What is my audible to actually, again, optimize that training window? So if I'm seeing an issue in the data or something that I feel is conflicting with what we want to do that day, do I now have a window of time to improve the way that athlete sequences or moves, or alleviate pain from what they're going through at that time to optimize that training window? So if there is a problem, what is a decent solution to that, and is it something that can be done in a good amount of time, or in a short amount of time? to be more clear. So there's, I think, measuring things and just saying, okay, noted, as opposed to measuring something and having a plan for that, maybe immediately. There's a big difference there. And the athlete sees that. The
Mm.
athlete knows and will feel like a lab rat if they are constantly tested in something and nothing is done about it. And
Yeah,
they will stop doing your test. The more that you have immediate solutions and or discussions around how you're going to audible or change the program or audible to something different, um, the better chance for buy-in and the more education that there is in that process.
nice. Yeah, I love what you're saying there, especially um, I always say test your curiosity is something I recommend to practitioners. And firstly, if there isn't curiosity about the power of a certain technology or a power of a certain method, then you're probably not looking to enhance performance. You're probably just going through the motions. So that's the first thing on a practitioner level is have some curiosity, but don't jump to assess that curiosity with your athletes. Use yourself as that test subject. I think what you say there about put yourself through it, understand the feelings, understand what it feels like to jump in the shallow range versus a deeper range. What does it do to the metrics? And the other thing that you mentioned, which I love, is this performance solutions component. And for me, again, I'm just talking with the Hytro badge on here. I'm thinking about where are my performance opportunities with BFR prior to training. And you talked about pain relief and reduced apprehension through range of motion. I think that's a brilliant opportunity for BFR training, both for strength training on the road you've mentioned today, and also rehab we know about, but then also post recovery. And it has to be practically applied in those facets. So there's no point in throwing out a method that isn't practically viable because your athletes don't have the technology for it, for example, or can't take it home. So that you've definitely shared a really methodical thought process there about rolling out a tech and being comfortable with it and happy with its reliability. Of use for its athletes, which is great. We're going to wrap up here. It's been such a rich discussion already, and we could go on for hours, I know.
Yeah, we
But
could.
in terms of the wrapping up here, looking into the future, what trends or shifts are you seeing in baseball do you predict may happen when it comes to physical performance um, in the world of baseball?
I think again, and I've mentioned this previously, chatting with Warren a bit. I think we've gone more into this, performance mindset of how we can build that versus more of like how can we enhance recovery. I
Hmm.
think we're realizing, and I think we see it a lot more that we're not getting any of the adaptation we're looking for if we don't know how to prioritize recovery. So I feel that we continue to go to that way in that direction. Um, whether it's teams or organizations deciding to stay overnight in another place instead of a late night flight, or uh, like simple things as like passive BFR post game and stuff like that. Like that's the direction I feel that we're going in is how do we enhance that? And then you have, these readers like Aura and Whoop that are like, validating a lot of that recovery. And so we continue to want to optimize and quantify recovery. I just think we're going to continue going in that way. And so I think it's a good place to be going, to be honest.
Yeah. Is it looking back at your time in baseball, is it actually one of the hardest things to instigate because it's individual, but also like you want to get people home, right? As soon as the game finishes. Like, was it tough for you to instigate recovery,
Yeah.
or was ownership
Yeah.
on the player or the athlete?
Yeah, because if you're my coach and you just continue to harp on the get your 8 hours, like I'm just not really listening, man.
Yeah.
Like you can talk about all of these things, but if you can show me something, show me where one of these things can really improve my day to day. I think so many people just need to see it. They need to have a specific example, and then I think they'll get a lot deeper into that. But if you could just harping at people to recover and how important it is, I think guys just get tired of hearing it. So it's
Mm.
specific examples, and that's where like, hey, if we do something like post game BFR passively, a few rounds as they're sitting in their locker before they hit the shower. Next day, what do they think from an RPE perspective? Do they feel
Yeah.
more recovered?
Yeah.
Do they feel better? If you get feedback like that and they hear themselves discussing that they feel better, they're likely going to build that habit into their routine. So I think it's just really more of like getting players to see and feel things and educate. And then, that's where recovery, then they start taking it on their own.
Nice. It's a really tough ask, isn't it, for a strength coach working in baseball because you're always thinking about the next job. What's happening tomorrow? What are we preparing for? How do we get on this plane? And so, yes, you may put in the intervention like a cryo intervention, a bike spin, a BFR recovery, but then the retest of that, the closing of the loop is an art form for a coach. And I've seen it and I've been guilty of it myself. It's the easiest thing to pass up and move on to the next thing. But then that just devalues the power of interpreting how effective that modality was for you. Can
Yes,
it looks like you can reflect on that in the same way when baseball's such a busy sport.
it is, and I think, yeah, again, and it's not. It's the ask has to be minimal. Let's try this one thing, and let's really see how we respond to
Yeah.
this. It's not like a list of things to do because this is like, okay, cool, man, thanks, I appreciate it. Like, not going to do this. So, yeah, it's powerful seeing improvements and small ones at that. So I think just highlighting them and again celebrating small wins. Not everything has to be a gigantic win, but what is something that helps you feel slightly better, and even that is helpful. So
Nice. Last question here. I'm going to ask you to answer it in two parts. For the listener who might be thinking about working in the minor league system and the listener who might be in a major league system, we've talked about the differences there in development and I guess winning. From a physical development perspective, what's the one bit of advice you'd be giving people working with people in that development system versus the big show, the major league?
man, that's a great question, and I actually I've spoken with a coach recently that actually had gone from minor league strength coach to major league strength coach. And Um, yeah, I would say that there was a bit of disappointment in terms of the overall development that was being able to occur at the big league level
Mm.
because it is a little bit, and I went through this myself. So if I was speaking to a young coach, there's definitely a bit of a difference between the development of minor league guys and managing guys at the highest level in the big leagues. And a lot of guys, look, they're in the big leagues for a reason. They don't always need to be pushing the next quality or pushing their or building their engine in season, right? It's something where some of these guys are finely tuned where they're at, and that's why they're there making a lot of money. On the other side of that, guys that are in rookie ball or young levels, A ball, double A ball, there's a really prime window there to build engines and develop guys and to really kind of build their habits. And that was, if you ask me where I had the most fun, it was in minor league baseball.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
absolutely was. I was able to share a lot of my experiences of where I probably screwed up as a minor leaguer, and also really educate guys to build good habits at young ages, and but also it's like guys that work in the college sector. I mean, that's essentially the age group you're working with. The amount of improvement and adaptation you can get from guys at that age is really fun. And then, working with a 35-year-old in the big leagues is not the same picture. So it has its own nuances and fun parts about it, but it's definitely a little bit different. So that would be, just some basic things that I observed from both levels there, or multiple
Nice.
levels. Yeah.
Yeah. If I could repeat back what I'm hearing is don't waste that opportunity for physical development in the minor leagues and become a elite problem solver and performance solutions practitioner in the major leagues. Um,
Yeah.
Brian, huge thanks from everyone on the Hydro team for you giving up your time today. It's been insightful, enjoyable for me. I wish we could have more time, but thank you so much for contributing today to the podcast. And yeah, we look forward to continuing to work with you and chatting to you soon in the future.
Yeah, Dan, we'll run it back one of these times and we'll go a lot
Yeah.
deeper on one of these categories. But always an honor and a pleasure being invited on here, and I appreciate the time, of
Nice one, Brian. Thank you so much.
course.